The lights in the auditorium reflected in her eyes as I held the microphone steady from the stage. My heart was beating faster than I ever thought possible, but my voice came out clear, sharp, like the blade of a razor. I want to take this opportunity to announce something important. Not just for me, but for the woman who has shared my life for over a decade. Murmurs spread among the guests, their faces curious, some smiling, while others expressed restrained surprise. I could feel the weight of the stares, but mine were fixed on her, sitting in the front row, trying to hold back a smile that looked more uncomfortable by the second. She knew. Oh, she knew something was about to happen. Today I've decided to close a chapter, I continued, ignoring the nervous words she was muttering to herself, her wide eyes trying to understand how far I was going to go. It is with relief, not pain, that I announce my divorce. The hall fell silent as if time itself had stopped. Someone choked in the background, while shock washed over the faces around them. But what caught my attention was her expression. It wasn't just despair. It was pure panic, as if the ground had been ripped out from under her feet. She stood up, her face pale, her lips trembling. "Please don't do that here. Not like this." Her voice was so low I could barely hear it. But the pain in it was loud and clear. "Why not?" I replied, my voice now colder. "This is how you chose to destroy everything. It wasn't in secret. It was right under my eyes. So why should I offer you privacy now?" My tone was acidic, charged with a venom I could barely contain. The gazes were now divided between me and her. Some whispered, others pretended to ignore, but all were attentive, fascinated by this spectacle that was as unexpected as it was devastating. "Please," she insisted, louder now, tears starting to flow. "Can we talk about this, alone?" Alone. That was exactly what she wanted. To resolve everything without witnesses, without the world knowing how deeply she had betrayed me. But that was no longer an option. Not after everything I had discovered. The previous weeks had been a nightmare carefully disguised as normal life. Forced smiles, silent dinners. And that annoyingly perfect excuse, work meetings. The always impeccable clothes, the touched-up makeup, the cell phone hidden as if it were a forbidden artifact. Small details that added up until they exploded like a bomb inside me. I didn't know I was being deceived until the night I found the first signs. A message on her cell phone, forgotten on the kitchen worktop, the screen lighting up for just a few seconds. "I can't wait to see you again tomorrow. Same place as always." The blood boiled in my veins, but I didn't do anything right then. Not yet. For days, I watched. Every detail. Every movement. The calls that were cancelled as soon as I entered the room. The disguised smiles as I looked at my cell phone screen. And then, that night when she left, saying she had to work late, I followed. My heart was heavy, torn between the hope of being wrong and the fear of being right. And, of course, fear won out. The restaurant was discreet but sophisticated, the kind of place she liked. From a distance, I saw the two of them laughing, the way she touched his hand on the table, so casual and intimate at the same time. My stomach churned. I didn't wait to confront them. Not yet. I needed more. More proof. More certainty. I needed something that would make me overcome my doubt and set me free. That's when I decided to investigate further, and what I discovered destroyed me from the inside out. It wasn't just a chance encounter. It was something more elaborate, more planned. And it involved not only her, but also someone I considered a trusted colleague. Someone with whom I shared not only business, but also moments of my life. Now, as she begged, as the gazes continued to be locked on us, I felt a strange relief. For the first time in weeks, I was in control. "There's nothing more to talk about, is there? I think it's clear to everyone here that you've made your choices. Now it's my turn to make mine." She sobbed, unable to defend herself, unable to deny it. And as much as the moment brought me a sense of justice, something was still throbbing inside me. It wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed answers. I needed to understand why, even though I knew that no explanation would be enough to repair the damage. As she ran out of the auditorium, tears streaming down her face, I turned to the audience, took a deep breath and continued what I had started. But inside me, one question kept echoing. What now? What was I supposed to do with all the pain, all the anger, all the shards of what had once seemed like a perfect life? Perhaps the answer was just around the corner. But would it be enough to set me free? Or was it just the start of something much deeper and darker? Welcome to the channel where betrayal is never forgiven. Here, all the stories are fictional, but they carry an inescapable truth. Betrayal destroys lives, relationships, and the trust that takes years to build. Our aim is to show how every choice has devastating consequences. So get ready to dive into an intense and surprising narrative. Hold on, because the story that follows will stir your emotions. Good story. The living room exuded the warmth of a home built over years of complicity and dedication. Amanda was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with almost mechanical precision. Classical music was playing in the background, filling the room with a carefully cultivated serenity. She had always liked to create an atmosphere of peace at home, something that seemed to contrast with the chaos of the world outside. However, that apparent calm masked something that, if mentioned, would dismantle the whole facade of perfection. In the office upstairs, Daniel was reviewing documents for an important project. He was a methodical man, someone who valued organization and control, both in his career and in his personal life. His success as an executive in a technology company was the result of years of hard work and sleepless nights. For him, maintaining family stability was as essential as securing the next million-dollar contract at work. Amanda and Daniel had been married for 14 years. When they met, they were practically opposites. She, a visual artist with unpretentious ideas and a love of small details, such as the reflection of light on window panes. He, a practical man who believed that happiness lay in financial security and well-defined goals. And somehow these differences worked. She brought lightness to his life, while he offered her a sense of direction that she never knew she needed, but ended up embracing. The couple lived in a spacious house in a leafy neighborhood. The neighbors described them as the perfect couple, successful, always smiling and with a life that seemed to inspire a certain healthy envy. But the smiles weren't always as genuine as they seemed. Over time, the marriage became routine. It wasn't unhappy, but neither was it the passionate romance of the early years. Amanda missed the long conversations by candlelight, the spontaneous gestures of affection. Daniel, on the other hand, believed that his role was to ensure that they never had to worry about anything, as long as he worked hard enough to provide for them. What Daniel didn't realize was that Amanda longed for something more emotional than financial. The nights when he arrived late and found her already asleep were becoming more and more frequent. And when he was finally there, her thoughts seemed to wander far away. Amanda tried to fill that void by immersing herself in her work as a freelance illustrator, but art didn't make up for everything. However, the emotional absence was not a one-way street. Daniel also felt that something was out of place, but he didn't know how to verbalize it. He saw Amanda becoming more and more distant, more absorbed in her own thoughts, and this made him uneasy. Sometimes he thought about suggesting that they take a vacation together, but he always put it off, convinced that work couldn't wait. That evening, dinner was served and Amanda was waiting for Daniel at the table, her face illuminated by candles that she had lit more for herself than for him. When Daniel came down the stairs, with the firm steps that always announced his presence, she gave him a discreet smile. He reciprocated, but his eyes showed the weariness of a long day. They sat down and, as usual, the conversations were brief and practical: bills, appointments, work. Nothing that touched on deep emotions. Later, while Amanda washed the dishes, her thoughts wandered. She wondered when things had changed, when enthusiasm had given way to predictability. Perhaps it was natural after so many years together, she told herself, but the doubt still lingered. She sighed and looked out of the window, seeing the neighbors' lights flickering in the distance. Something inside her seemed to be closing in, like a locked room to which no one had access. Daniel, meanwhile, was in his office again, going over the same documents he had brought to dinner in his mind. He knew that Amanda was trying something with the candles, the carefully prepared setting, but he didn't have the strength to match it. Work demanded everything of him, and he convinced himself that he would make up for it later, perhaps at the weekend, with a gesture that might make her smile. The next morning, the sun filtered through the living room curtains, illuminating Amanda's carefully decorated space. It was a Saturday, and they both decided to spend the day at home. Daniel wanted to catch up on some technical reading, while Amanda planned to finish an illustration for an important client. Their silent presence filled the house, but the absence of meaningful conversation was as tangible as the furniture around them. Their life was made up of moments like this. Small moments shared, but rarely lived together. There were no intense fights or heated arguments. Just a distance that quietly settled between them, growing day by day. That afternoon, Amanda received a message on her cell phone. She read it quickly and put it away. It wasn't unusual for work messages to arrive at the most unlikely times, but something about the way she looked away made Daniel suspicious. He didn't say anything, but remained attentive. Maybe it was just exhaustion speaking louder, or maybe it was something more. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. Meanwhile, Amanda tried to keep her mind focused on the task in front of her. The message she had received was not from work, but from a friend inviting her for coffee next week. Even so, she knew that any interruption seemed like a dangerous detour for Daniel, whose relentless discipline demanded that everything always be in order. Silence continued to reign in that house which, from the outside, looked like the perfect example of harmony. But inside, something was about to change. Something that neither of them was prepared to face, but which had already begun to unfold, albeit in silence. And so the house, the relationship and Amanda and Daniel's own feelings remained suspended, like a rope about to snap. What came next was as inevitable as it was surprising. The morning began with a cloudy sky, reflecting the heavy mood Amanda felt when she woke up. Daniel had already left for work, as usual, before the sun had fully risen. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee cooling in her cup as her thoughts wandered. Over the last few days, something seemed to be building up inside her, like a storm about to break. Daniel's schedule was fuller than ever, and he was rarely present. When he was, his attention always seemed to be elsewhere. Amanda tried not to resent it, but as the days went by, the feeling of loneliness became harder to ignore. She looked at her cell phone, which was vibrating on the table, displaying a message from her friend, Laura. It was just a reminder for the coffee they had arranged, but even that seemed to bring a momentary lightness to the day. During the meeting, Laura seemed particularly interested in talking about relationships. "Are you and Daniel still the perfect couple you always were?" she asked, with a curious smile. Amanda hesitated, not wanting to admit how much things had changed. "We're fine," she replied, looking away. The conversation soon moved on to other topics, but Laura's question remained on her mind. On the way home, Amanda found herself reflecting on what being okay really meant. They didn't fight, there were no confrontations. But there was something worse, a silence that seemed more blatant every day. It was as if they were both avoiding anything that might upset the fragile balance that remained. When Amanda got home, she found a note from Daniel on the kitchen counter. "I'm going to be late. Important meeting. Don't wait up for me." It wasn't unusual, but at that moment, loneliness weighed more heavily. She picked up her phone and typed a quick message to a person she had come into contact with more frequently in recent weeks, Marcos, an old friend who had reappeared in her life. "Do you want to have coffee tonight?" she sent, before she had time to reconsider. The reply came almost immediately, "Sure. Same place." Amanda hesitated, but the idea of having someone to talk to seemed more appealing than spending another night alone in that big, empty house. She put on something casual, but that made her feel good, and left without leaving any messages. The cafe they had chosen was discreet, a place where few people would recognize them. When she arrived, Marcos was already there, with the easy smile that she had always found captivating. The conversation flowed naturally. Marcos was someone who seemed to understand her frustrations without her having to explain much. He asked questions that showed genuine interest, something Amanda hadn't felt for a long time. At one point, he placed his hand on hers, a simple gesture, but loaded with intent. Amanda didn't flinch, but she didn't respond immediately either. There was an internal battle going on inside her. She knew what it meant, what it could lead to. But at that moment, she didn't have the strength to fight the impulse. When Amanda returned home, the guilt was already beginning to show. She knew that crossing that line, even emotionally, was something that couldn't be erased. However, a part of her felt a strange sense of relief, as if she had found something that had been missing. She went to bed, but it took her a while to fall asleep, the weight of her choices keeping her awake. In the days that followed, the messages between Amanda and Marcos became more frequent, more intimate. Meanwhile, Daniel remained immersed in his work, unaware of the subtle changes in his wife's behavior. He thought that the silence between them was just a reflection of their tiredness, something that could be resolved with time. But Amanda knew there was more at stake. Every time Marcos suggested they meet again, she hesitated less. One evening, while Daniel was still at work, Amanda decided to go out again. This time, it wasn't just to talk. There was an unresolved tension between her and Marcos that seemed impossible to ignore. When she arrived at the agreed place, the atmosphere seemed different. There was an intimacy in the air that sent a chill down Amanda's spine. She knew she was on the verge of something that would change everything. Meanwhile, Daniel, contrary to what Amanda thought, had come home early. He found the living room empty, the kitchen with no sign of dinner. The note that Amanda usually left on such occasions wasn't there. A feeling of unease came over him. He tried to ignore it, but something made him check the messages on Amanda's cell phone, which she had forgotten on the table. It wasn't something he usually did, but her absence that night made him uncomfortable. What he found was devastating. The messages exchanged with Marcos left no room for doubt. Daniel felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. It was as if everything he had believed about their marriage had been a lie. He put down his cell phone, his head spinning. At first, he didn't know how to react. Anger, pain, betrayal, all these emotions hit him at once. He decided not to confront her immediately. He needed more. More information, more context. He needed to understand how far it had gone, what was really happening. Over the next few days, Daniel began to observe Amanda more closely. He noticed the furtive glances on the phone, the smiles that she thought went unnoticed. Above all, he noticed his own pain growing with every new detail he noticed. The following evening, Amanda went out again, and Daniel decided to follow her. The anguish of seeing her enter a restaurant and meet Marcos was unbearable. He watched from afar, seeing gestures and smiles that he hadn't seen for years. When Marcos held her hand, Daniel felt that something inside him had broken forever. He didn't go in, he didn't confront. He returned home, feeling overwhelmed by a wave of emotions that he could barely process. When Amanda returned later, she found Daniel sitting in the living room, his gaze empty. She didn't say anything, and he remained silent too, but they both knew that something had changed. The tension in the air was palpable, and Amanda, even without knowing exactly what Daniel knew, felt the weight of her guilt crushing her. The betrayal was exposed, but what Daniel would do next was still unknown. And he knew there was more to the story, something that still needed to be uncovered. Something that, when it came to light, would change everything in ways Amanda couldn't predict. The morning began cold, with an overcast sky that seemed to foreshadow the events of that Friday. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen, but not really seeing the numbers and graphs that flashed before him. His mind was elsewhere, fixed on the emotional storm brewing inside him. He had spent days going through the messages he found on Amanda's cell phone, trying to decide what to do. Each word was a knife that cut deeper, but he knew he needed a plan before he acted. Amanda went downstairs, her light footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. When she saw him standing there, his eyes fixed on the screen, she hesitated for a moment. Something seemed different, but she ignored the feeling. "Didn't you go to work today?" she asked casually, putting the kettle on. Her voice had a tone of normality that, to Daniel, sounded almost like an affront. "I decided I needed a day at home," he replied, without looking up from his laptop. The answer was dry, distant, and Amanda realized, even without wanting to admit it, that something was off. The tension in the air was palpable, but Amanda tried to remain calm. "Maybe it's a good thing. You've been working so hard lately," she commented as she prepared the coffee. But the truth was that Daniel's words, or lack of them, weighed more heavily than she would have liked to admit. Throughout the day, Daniel continued to observe her. Every gesture, every nervous smile, every moment when she seemed distant. He was building up the courage for the inevitable confrontation. He had to choose the right moment. When night fell, Amanda was getting ready to go out again. She had already come up with a ready-made excuse about meeting Laura. Daniel knew she was lying, but instead of confronting her directly, he decided to go ahead with what he had planned. He let her leave, without question, without any indication that he knew what was going on. However, he wouldn't stay at home that night. He had decided to act. He already knew where Amanda would be, and he knew exactly how to expose the truth once and for all. It wouldn't just be for her, but also for Marcos and everyone involved. The restaurant was busy, but Daniel managed to get a discreet table with a perfect view of the private corner where Amanda and Marcos were sitting. He watched them in silence for a few minutes, noticing how relaxed she seemed, the smiles she reserved for that man. It was as if she were someone else, someone he no longer recognized. It made him feel angry, but also deeply sad. How had it come to this? Finally, he stood up and walked over to their table. Amanda saw him first, her face immediately turning into a mask of panic. Marcos, confused, looked from one to the other, trying to understand what was going on. "Good evening," said Daniel, his voice calm but charged with an intensity that made Amanda shudder. "I hope I'm not interrupting." He pulled out a chair and sat down, without waiting for an invitation. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" Amanda managed to stammer, her voice wavering. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, crossing his arms and looking directly at Marcos. "But I think I already know the answer." Marcos tried to get up, but Daniel held up a hand, motioning for him to stay. "Sit down. I haven't finished yet." The authority in his voice made Marcos obey, even though he was reluctant. "So this is how it ends, Amanda?" Daniel continued, turning to her. 14 years of marriage. All that for this?" The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Amanda lowered her head, unable to hold his gaze. "Daniel, please, can we talk about this at home?" she asked, her voice full of despair. "At home?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Do you think there's still an at home for us after this?" He pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and placed it on the table, sliding Amanda the messages he had captured. "I read everything. Every word. So don't tell me it's not what it seems. I know exactly what it is." Marcos looked at Amanda, visibly uncomfortable, as she remained silent, tears starting to roll down her face. Daniel shook his head, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and pain as he watched her crumble. But he knew it wasn't over yet. "I didn't come here just to confront you," he said, looking again at Marcos. "I also came to clarify a few things. Because this goes far beyond betrayal, doesn't it, Marcos?" Marcos's expression changed immediately, the discomfort turning into something closer to fear. He tried to deny it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the man in front of him. "And what do you tell me about the contracts you signed with my company? About the benefits you got by manipulating your contacts?" Amanda looked from one to the other, confused. "What is he talking about, Marcos?" Daniel stood up, his voice now louder. "He wasn't just after you, Amanda. He was also using me. To gain access to resources, to close deals that benefited him and his company, at my expense." Marcos tried to interrupt, but Daniel didn't give way. "You used my wife as a pawn in your game, and she, well, it seems she was a willing piece." The silence that followed was unbearable. Amanda looked at Daniel with a mixture of guilt and disbelief. She knew she had betrayed his trust, but she had never imagined that there was something darker behind Marcos's actions. Daniel took out his cell phone again and showed her the emails, contracts and evidence he had gathered over the last few days. "I could destroy you, Marcos, and your company. And maybe I still will." He then looked at Amanda. "But before that, I need to decide what to do about the two of us. If there is still an us. He stood up, looking at them both one last time before leaving. "Enjoy your dinner. It'll be your last quiet meal for a long time." Amanda sat there in shock as Marcos finally seemed to realize how deep he had gotten himself into. The storm to come would be devastating. The silence was deafening as Amanda sat at the table, unable to process what had just happened. Her mind revolved around Daniel's revelations, his every word echoing like thunder in her thoughts. Marcos, on the other side of the table, looked equally stunned, but his gaze was different. He didn't show any regret, just restrained irritation, like someone who sees themselves cornered and is already planning their next move. Amanda took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. Finally, she broke the silence. "What did you do, Marcos?" Her voice was hoarse, filled with a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. "I just did what I needed to do to move forward," he replied, his voice low but firm. "Business is business, Amanda. You know that." She shook her head in disbelief. "Business? You used my marriage as part of your business? And you used me as what? A shortcut? A tool?" "It's not that simple," he retorted, trying to remain calm. "You know there's a lot more at stake. It wasn't just me. Your husband is also to blame. He can pretend to be the martyr now, but the truth is that he's not as innocent as he wants to appear." Amanda stood up abruptly, her chair dragging noisily across the floor. "Enough. I can't do this now. I need some air." She grabbed her bag and hurried out, ignoring Marcos's call. As she walked down the sidewalk, the cold night enveloped her, but the feeling of suffocation persisted. She wanted to scream, but knew that no sound would ease the weight on her chest. As she walked aimlessly, flashes of her life with Daniel went through her mind. The good times, the smiles shared, the plans for the future. It all seemed so distant now, as if they belonged to another life. Amanda finally arrived home. It was dark and silent, except for a dim light coming from Daniel's office. She hesitated before entering, but knew she had to face him. When she opened the door, she found him sitting in his chair, looking at an envelope on the table. He looked up, his expression tired but firm. "You're back quickly," he commented, without emotion. "Daniel," began Amanda, but he held up his hand, interrupting her. "You don't have to explain yourself. Not now. I already know everything I need to know. The question now is what we're going to do with it." He pointed to the envelope. "Here's the divorce petition. Signed by me. All that's missing is you." Amanda felt a knot tighten in her throat. "Please don't do it like that, like this," he interrupted again, his voice rising a tone. "And how am I supposed to do that? Pretend everything's fine?" Ignore the fact that you destroyed what we had, not just by betraying us, but by allowing that man to use you and our relationship to get to me. She tried to move closer, but he backed away, getting up and walking over to the window. Why, Amanda? Why did you do it? What was missing for you? I know I'm not perfect, but I thought that at least we had something solid. That we could get through anything together. I don't know, she replied, her voice cracking. I felt so lost. Alone. And he showed up, saying all the things I wanted to hear. I didn't plan it, Daniel. I made a mistake. Mistake? He turned to her, his eyes full of pain. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A choice you made over and over again. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we built together. His words cut deep, and Amanda collapsed on the sofa, the tears finally coming in full force. She wanted to ask for forgiveness, she wanted to beg him to reconsider, but she knew that nothing she could say could erase what she had done. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples, as if trying to relieve the pressure he felt. I'm not going to make any rash decisions. Not now. But I need you to know that, whatever happens, I won't let it destroy me. I'm going to protect what's mine. What I've built. And I'm going to move on, with or without you. Amanda nodded, unable to respond. The determination in his eyes was frightening, but also understandable. He had been irreparably hurt, and she knew she would be lucky if he ever managed to forgive her, even partially. The following days were marked by constant tension. They hardly spoke to each other, and when they did, it was short, practical conversations, as if they were two strangers sharing the same house. Amanda tried to find ways to make amends, but Daniel remained distant, almost unreachable. Meanwhile, Daniel began to put into practice the plans he had silently drawn up. He consulted lawyers, reviewed contracts and ensured that Marcos would no longer have any access to his business. Marcos's downfall was swift and public. He lost contracts, was excluded from influential circles and saw his professional reputation plummet. Daniel felt a bitter satisfaction as he watched the downfall of the man who had almost destroyed his life. But there was something that bothered him. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't simply erase Amanda from his life. They had a past, a history, and despite everything, he still cared about her. He didn't know if it was love or just the remnants of something that had once been, but the confusion consumed him. Amanda, for her part, was trapped in a cycle of guilt and regret. She knew that Marcos wasn't the answer to the emptiness she felt, but now it was too late. She had risked everything and lost. And seeing Daniel so distant, so determined to move on, she began to wonder if there was any way to rebuild what had been destroyed. The tension between them reached its peak one rainy night, when Amanda finally mustered the courage to confront him. Daniel, please listen to me. Just this once. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I still love you. That I've always loved you. He looked at her for a long moment, conflicting emotions flashing across his face. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. Love isn't enough, Amanda. What you did broke something inside me, something I don't know if it can be repaired. I wanted to believe that we could get over it, but honestly, I don't know if I want to. His words were a blow, but Amanda knew he was being honest. And, despite the pain, she recognized that perhaps this was the first step toward some kind of resolution. Even though there was still a lot to be faced, they both knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The weeks that followed were marked by a deep silence between Amanda and Daniel. The house, once full of routines and interactions, now seemed like an abandoned battlefield, where each carefully avoided the rubble of what had been their life together. Amanda, consumed by guilt and a sense of impending loss, knew she was living her last moments in that shared space. Daniel, for his part, was focused on his own plans, driven by a mixture of pain and determination. The divorce was made official quickly, something Amanda didn't try to contest. She knew that any attempt to argue would be futile in the face of the facts that were against her. The agreement was straightforward: Daniel kept the house, while Amanda agreed to leave without demanding compensation. Her decision was both an act of repentance and a recognition that it was time to start again, even if the price was high. On the night she left the house for the last time, Amanda couldn't help but look back at the door she had closed so many times over the years. But this time, there was a sense of closure that she never imagined she would feel. She had lost so much, but she knew that the biggest challenge was yet to come: rebuilding a life without Daniel and dealing with the consequences of her choices. Daniel watched through the window as she drove away. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a deep weariness. He felt no joy at seeing her go, but no regret either. It was a necessary decision, a line that needed to be drawn so that he could move on. He knew the road to healing would be long, but for the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope that life could eventually be rebuilt. While Amanda searched for a new place to live, she also began to face the harsh reality of her professional situation. The revelation of her betrayal and involvement with Marcos not only shook her personal life, but also splashed onto her professional reputation. Clients canceled projects and former colleagues began to avoid her. It was as if she was paying a much higher price than she had imagined. Despite this, Amanda decided not to give up. She enrolled in courses, sought therapy, and started working on small illustrations to get her career back on track, albeit in a humble way. For Daniel, the focus was on rediscovering himself. He began to devote more time to his daughters, who, despite being at university, were an emotional support point in his life. At weekends, he started going for walks, something he had never prioritized before, and found a new group of friends, who helped him see that there was life beyond work and marital problems. During these moments, he began to realize that although Amanda's betrayal had left deep scars, it wouldn't define who he was or who he could become. As for Marcos, his fall was as swift as his rise had been illusory. With contracts terminated and doors closing, he saw his career crumble. But the most painful blow came when his wife, on discovering his involvement with Amanda and his business maneuvers, decided to file for divorce, taking with her a large part of his remaining assets. Now alone, without the prestige and support he once enjoyed, Marcos was forced to abandon the luxurious lifestyle he had built on lies. A few months later, Daniel received an invitation to an art exhibition at a community center. Reluctantly, he decided to attend. It was there that he met Carolina, an event organizer with a vibrant personality and a light-hearted approach to life. Their conversation began casually, but evolved into something more. Carolina didn't try to fix him or minimize what he had been through, but, with patience and respect, began to help him see that the future could bring something good. Meanwhile, Amanda continued to rebuild her life. In one of her therapy sessions, she realized that part of her choices came from an emotional void that she had never faced directly. She decided to face it, not to win Daniel back, but to become a better person for herself. Her journey was lonely, but little by little she found small moments of joy in her art and in the process of learning to forgive herself. Amanda and Daniel met again a few months later, at a chance meeting to discuss matters relating to their daughters. It was a cordial meeting, but devoid of any emotional tension. When they said goodbye, Amanda noticed that Daniel had changed. He seemed lighter, more at peace with himself. And although she still felt the pain of everything she had lost, she also felt something she hadn't expected: gratitude. Gratitude that he had been part of her life and had taught her, in a hard but essential way, lessons that she would carry with her forever. Daniel, for his part, also recognized at that moment that the chapter with Amanda was truly closed. He didn't hate her, but he didn't want to go back to what they had. They had both changed, and that was enough. As he watched her walk away, he realized that, for the first time in a long time, the past no longer held him back. Life went on for both of them, with ups and downs, as it does for everyone. Amanda found new ways to express herself and, eventually, a new connection with someone who understood her past, but didn't define her by it. Daniel and Carolina became a strong couple, building a relationship based on respect and honesty, something he finally felt he deserved. Each found their own path, marked by the choices they had made, but also by those they decided not to repeat. The betrayal had destroyed many things, but it also made room for something neither of them had expected, a second chance to start again, each in their own way. Now that you've reached the end of this story, we want to know what you think. What did you think of the characters' decisions? Were they fair? Would you have acted differently? Leave your comment below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more impactful stories like this one. Remember, this channel does not support any kind of betrayal, and our stories are created to show how choices have profound consequences. See you next time.